Ethic Cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to Ethicsverse Day. The Ethicsverse is the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern if you believe an ethical workplace culture can change our world. So if it's your first time joining us, drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat and share where you are watching from today. We like to say here that your network is your net worth and neither are big enough. So connect with someone today. And you know, we came up with this idea for the Ethicsverse a couple of years ago, and it was really a desire to drive and really create a space for people in our space that are passionate about ethics, passionate about compliance, and passionate about employee experience without trying to trick them into thinly veiled sales presentations. Gag me. So we just wanted to create great content every week to provide actionable insights and to provide connection and authentic value to people in this space who call this space home. So this has kind of grown into a community where we gather every single week to sharpen our saws, connect and learn and improve. And in our industry, we have this really unique opportunity. And that opportunity is rooted in the people that make this industry up. Literally every single person I know and have met here is smart and exacting and conscientious and curious and thoughtful and caring. It's a really unique group of people whose biggest differentiator, I think, is that they care. They care for their companies, they care for their employees, and they care for their teams. And they care about leaving the world better than they found it. And we're all happy to share our techniques, our perspectives, our struggles, victories, lessons learned, stuff like that. And I just love the space that we call home. There's no space that's more collaborative or communal or collegial. And listen, you get 0 bonus points in life for reinventing the wheel. And the great thing is that here, you don't have to. There's no other space where literal competitors can reach out to each other and share notes about what's working and what's not. And there's no other role in our organizations that can have the impact that we can have, not just on de-risking the company, but on improving the bottom line and ultimately improving that employee experience. So we can literally change our world by making our workplaces more ethical. And in the next 10 years, we are going to experience more change than we can ever fathom. 10 years from now, the shape of our work and the impact we're going to be the impact that we're going to have in our organizations is going to be vastly different. And so our job is to navigate through this change and to pull that future forward. We need to time travel and make the future a reality sooner. We got to look into the future and pull that future back to today. And that's what today is all about. We have 3 awesome sessions with some of my favorite thought leaders, best friends, and biggest heroes. Sidebar, 2 years ago, I made a list of my dream event, and literally every single person that's on Ethicsverse Day today was on that list. It's wild. So write your goals down, okay? So AI seems to be in every single conversation. Technologists like to use all these big, scary words. And so in our first session, which we're starting right now, we're going to be breaking down and demystifying AI and then providing some actual frameworks that you can apply in your organization. Remember, our game is a game of influence, and getting our seat at the table where we can put our unique gifts to work can be a real challenge. So at the 1:30 session, Matt Kelly is going to be talking to 3 of the best career advancement, persuasion, and communication experts I know, Lisa Bethlentini Walker, Hema Lomax, and the Compliance Week Mentor of the Year, Mel Sponholz. We're going to be discussing getting a seat at the table and how to drive more influence and impact in your career role. If you have your technology frameworks and you've built your influence in your organizations, you still have to have strategies to deal with regulatory scrutiny and help your organization to see around the curve. So finally, for our 3 p.m. 90-minute session, our 90-minute keynote, Matt Kelly is going to be discussing regulatory considerations and strategies with Hui Chen, Kenneth Polite, and Andrew McBride. He's the leader of Albemarle, who just won Program of the Year due to their outcome with the DOJ. Okay, so a couple of quick housekeeping items. We have 3 sessions. The first 2 are 1 hour and the last one's 90 minutes. Each session has a 30-minute break in between. So each session will also run long. So if there's questions that we haven't gotten to, the panelists are going to stay on and answer those questions. So you're welcome to stay there. So you can stick around for that after show Q&A, or you can click that next session button, and that's going to pop up a new tab for that next session. You can go ahead and go to that waiting room, get a bite to eat, cup of coffee, go to the bathroom, whatever. You'll also notice a demo button on your console. So in between sessions, you can jump into the demo room and get a classic Ethico no pitch zone flyby of our software if you're interested in that. These demo rooms are also going to be open throughout the session. So if you want to pop in there and ask a specific question or see a specific feature, you're welcome to do that as well. As always, keep your comments coming. We're going to work those into the conversation after the session. And as everyone loves, we're going to be giving away a ton of books today. So we're going to be giving away 50 books. Here are all the books we are featuring. If you're interested in checking some of those out, I think these should all be on your bookshelf. You can hit this QR code and you can see our entire library. So we're giving out 50 today. We're going to give out 50 per session, and then we're giving 20 out in the last session. So a lot of people are going to be learning today. So stay active in the chat. And then also, if you are coming to all 3 sessions, you are available to enter into this. Let me pull this up. Prize packs. We got a number of prize packs. So if you come to all 3 sessions, you'll be entered into a drawing to get one of these prize packs. And that is going to be the FCPA Survival Guide, a hoodie, and a nice little coupon. Before we dive into the session, I just want to share a couple of these podcasts that are in my rotation all the time. The Great Women in Compliance podcast is phenomenal. 2 Gurus Talk Compliance I love. Ethical Machines with Reed Blackman, our guest from today. And the Compliance Leaders Lounge with Ross Ronan. These are phenomenal. Your job is to learn. We have to keep learning. We have to keep up with all the changing times. And I would encourage you to keep these in your rotation. With that, we are going to dive right in. I'm Nick. How's it going? I'm Chief Servant and host of the Ethicsverse. And I'm going to pass it over to the one and only Christy Grant Hart. How's it going, Christy? Sidebar, real quick. We're trying to break 10,000 emojis today. I haven't eaten. No one's had breakfast yet. So keep those coming. And Christy, how's it going? Welcome.
Hey, Nick, I am delighted to be here. By the way, thank you for featuring my book and podcast. Appreciate very much. Love the support from the Ethicsverse for all of the thought leaders in our space. And talk about thought leaders in their space, Heavenly Days. We have 2 freaking rock stars that we are talking to right now. So I have the pleasure of moderating a conversation between Reed Blackman and Diana Kelly, who are so great. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I hadn't met Reed until our initial conversation here, and he's got so many strong opinions that it's just so much fun to listen to because I can't stand milquetoast answers. So this is going to be very cool for you. And I first
I do not have strong opinions.
That's kind of a strong opinion.
Don't tell me what I think.
That's kind of a strong opinion.
Don't tell me what I think.
Sorry, yeah, I messed up.
Exactly, fair, good enough. And Diana Kelly, I first saw as the keynote at Compliance Week National Conference in April, and I was blown away. I've never heard anybody be able to describe AI so clearly, and also to be able to give such great tips for compliance officers, really workable tips. So that's my intention for this session today is that you come away with a lot clearer understanding. At the end, we're going to do what we call dumb Q&A, which basically means
just so you know, that's coming. Okay. Christy, are you there?
Nick? Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Hey.
It just started.
I just wanted to show you guys that.
The...
That's coming. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, good. Thank you for the preview. Okay. Back to the game. All right, so my intention is for you to end up with some really great insights that you can utilize. So, all right, let me, without further ado, allow my fantastic panelists to talk about themselves. Diana, let's start with you. Tell us about your background and why this topic is so important for compliance officers and legal and HR.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here and welcome everybody. I have been in IT for well over 30 years, most of that focused on security, but I actually got interested in AI originally in the 1970s. And for anybody that's like, there wasn't AI. There was. AI actually existed in the 1960s. A professor at MIT created a little AI bot, so to speak, Eliza, and it was supposed to basically pass the Turing test. Could people not think that it was a human? So people have been scared of AI and using AI since then. When I reconnected with AI, it was when I went to IBM, and it was pretty soon after Watson had beaten Jeopardy. And I got really fascinated with how did a machine beat Jeopardy, right? Because Jeopardy is a little bit tough. It's not just a clear question, right? It's the answer, and it's always hidden with clues. So I got really interested in that, and I was on and IBM Security, and we were training Watson for cyber. And I got fascinated by how that process worked and some of the complexities around it, and started to also get a little bit concerned about the security and the trust that people are putting into AI, and that sense of if it can beat Jeopardy, it's got to be so much smarter than me. And I continued my work in that area when I was at Microsoft, serving as the cybersecurity field CTO. Just still, met with the data team, tried to understand what was going on with AI, and also really focusing on my research to understand what are the risks and the potential problems. So it's kind of no surprise that my decades of security experience and practitioner work, I ended up as the CISO at an AI security company. And I'm here because it really matters to me that we understand this is amazing technology, but it's confusing for a lot of people. It feels really mystical and a little bit scary. And if we're afraid of something, it's very hard to make it transparent and safe. So I really want to be, active in that so that we can all benefit from AI, but not have to deal with being scared of it or have too many negative consequences from it.
I love all of that. And we're definitely going to dive in. Reed, why don't you tell us about your background and why you think this is so important to the compliance community?
My name is Reed Blackman. I'm the author of a book called Ethical Machines, and I host a podcast by the same name. I'm not a technologist by background at all. I'm a philosopher by background. So my PhD is in philosophy. I was a philosophy professor for 10 years. I specialized in ethics in particular for 20 plus years, 25 years. I forgot how many years now. So that's where I come from. I left academia in 2018. I started Virtue, an AI ethical risk consultancy. So we advise companies how not to go ethically sideways using AI. Why do I think this is a topic is important for compliance people? Well, look, at some point, if you're going to do AI ethics right, or AI ethical risk management right, or responsible AI, or trustworthy AI, or whatever you want to call it, if you're going to do it right, at some point, you're going to have compliance involved because you're going to have procedures. You're going to have workflows that are changed. You're going to have metrics for measuring all these things to make sure that the AI ethics program within your enterprise or your organization is actually being complied with. And then you want to be able to measure the impact of that. So compliance officers are a crucial function. They play a crucial function in the scaling and the maintenance of an AI ethics program. And we need an AI ethics program if you're dealing with AI, which most every company is at this point, and if not, you will be very soon, because things can go ethically, reputationally, regulatorily, and legally sideways quite easily, quite by accident, not due to the bad behavior of any one particular or even a set of individuals, just through lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, lack of an AI ethics program, and lack of compliance people making sure they're doing what they're supposed to do.
And we're going to try to avoid all of that lack today so that we have all those things instead of the lack of all those things. So fantastic for that. Diana, let's start with you. When I saw you at that Compliance Week conference, I loved how you started. You said, this isn't magic, this is software. And I think even that, just saying that distinction, when I think of like the AI little stars, it almost evokes magic and witches and potions in the middle of the night, right? We see this kind of magic, but it's not, it's software. Can you elaborate on that and what you think about that?
Yes, thank you. And I think you just defined it really perfectly. We see now AI has come to be those stars in our apps and our tools. And it's like, well, do your magical little sparkly thing. And people often talk about the black box of AI, and it can just feel just very out of people's reach. And it's really not. And this is the big thing with compliance and with technology is understanding that this is software. It is math, not magic. So being able to bring that into the compliance realm and measure it, as Reed was saying, being able to measure it, to understand it, get some transparency to it, and also understanding how it works. Because while it's not magic, it does generate, especially when we're talking about generative AI and when we're using machine learning for predictions and classifications, it's giving you answers. And in some cases, it's generating new answers or new content. So people being able to understand that, how does this work? What went into this? Is this smarter than I am or not? Because that sense of, oh my gosh, it's smarter, really can scare people. And that black box also can scare people. And it really shouldn't, because machine learning was in part designed to learn the way that humans learn. And we are we got more music. We are pattern matching machines. I mean, think about it. If you've got a child, or you're trying to teach a child how to recognize dogs, right? And you show it a Chihuahua, and you show it a German Shepherd, and you show it a Beagle. You don't think it's magic if it sees a Silken Windhound, right? And goes, doggy, right? You go, oh, it's now created this classification, this bucket of dog, and it can recognize dog versus cat, right? And we don't think, well, how does that work inside of that child's mind? What are the associations? What are the weights and the biases in that child's mind to figure out dog is what's dogness? And ML is very similar in that way. So when we worry about the black box, I think we're kind of worrying about the wrong thing. What we really need to think about is that this is software. We need to manage it and add security to the entire life cycle the way we do with software. And then so compliance can get transparency and measurability, and we need to monitor it continuously. These are the really important things. So software, math, not magic, and also remembering it's not necessarily smarter than us. It just may do some things better than humans do.
Let's take a riff on that. So Reed, during our pre-discussion, Nick did something. He said, oh my gosh, and I just read all these things about AGI, and what do you think about that? And you said, this is bull. And I went, what the heck is AGI? So I looked it up, and it turns out it's artificial general intelligence. which is basically the idea that the AI can be taught to think like humans and can learn without all the learning. You said that's nonsense. How close are we to Skynet, AGI? What is the reality of where we are right now?
Yeah, we're nowhere near that stuff. I don't think I stopped the word at bull for the record, but
Yeah,
the word kept
let's be
going when I
clear.
said it. Yeah. I mean, that concept bull is just not my style. Anyway, yeah, I think that's nonsense. So AGI, as you said, is something like, there's various definitions, but it's something like a thing that manifests the kind of intelligence that adult humans have, something along those lines. I think that's nonsense. I think, like Diana, we're just talking about software here. I think everyone should agree with that. I don't even think that should be controversial. I put it very slightly differently than Diana, but it's not a disagreement. It's just a slightly different framing. I call it software that learns by example. So to use Diana's example, you give it lots of examples of dogs, and it learns what dogs look like, all else equal. You give it lots of examples of what good credit applications look like, and it can distinguish between the good credit applications and the bad credit applications. You give it examples of, I don't know, applications for college, et cetera, et cetera. It learns what, and then you can also give it lots of examples of words being put together in ways that are coherent. So let's say you give it a bunch of books and magazines and transcripts of YouTube videos, and it learns from those examples how to cobble words together in a coherent fashion. And so what we get with large language models, ChatGPT, that sort of thing, is we get software that has learned from examples how to put words together in a sort of coherent fashion. And so then you get the at least appearance or the seeming of intelligence, the seeming of thought behind the words, thought behind putting the words together. But that's not what we have going on at all. It's still just software that learns by example. It's just have a slightly more complicated variety. Nowhere near intelligence. Nothing like understanding, which I would probably classify as distinct from intelligence. Nothing like sentience. Nothing like consciousness. None of that stuff. So we're nowhere near the AGI stuff. Don't worry about it. It's fun to think about, but it's not a thing anytime soon.
I mean, some people really enjoy ruminating in the middle of the night about the rise of machines, but if you're not one of those people, that's good. You don't have to do that then, okay?
Thanks for nice
I
movies.
love that. So,
yeah.
So Reed, would you mind sharing that Chinese room example? Because I think it's a really great example on how something can appear intelligent when it's actually not.
Yeah, sure. So there's this famous thought experiment by this guy, philosopher John Searle. So it goes like this. So suppose there's a native Chinese speaker. She's outside of a room, and she can push into the room a symbol or something like that. And you're inside this room. You get the symbol written on the card, and it just looks like squiggly lines to you. And you look, but you've got this book in the room with you, and you see, okay, I can look up this squiggle in this book, and it says that if someone pushes in this symbol, then I should push out this other symbol, because you've got not only a rule book, but a stack of cards with other, to you, squiggly lines on it. So in comes a squiggly line that looks like this. You look it up in your rule book. It says, push out this other squiggly card. So you push out that other squiggly card. And you just keep doing this. Cards keep coming in with squiggly lines. You keep consulting your rule book, and you shut out some other squiggly lines. And that's it. That's all you know that's going on. Now, the person outside, she thinks she's a native Chinese speaker, and she understands herself as she thinks, because she doesn't know any better, that she's having a conversation with someone who understands Chinese, because she put in, hey, how you doing? You pushed back out. I'm doing well. How about you? Great. I had a nice weekend. Oh, what did you do on the weekend? It's going back and forth. But then the question is, do you, inside that room, consulting your squiggly rule book and pushing squiggly signs out, do you understand Chinese now? And of course, the answer is no. You don't understand Chinese. You're just moving around symbols according to certain rules that you've been given. So you don't have any understanding here. There's no intellectual grasping of the meanings of the symbols. There's just moving symbols around according to certain words. You don't even know that they're symbols. You might not even know that it's Chinese or Mandarin that you're playing around with. What do computers do? Well, they take in certain symbols. It has no grasp of the meanings of those symbols. It's got certain rules that it follows. It just applies those rules and pushes out, so to speak, other symbols, although digitally. And so just like you don't understand Chinese, even though you are playing a role in this person from the outside thinking that they're engaged in a conversation with someone who understands Chinese, we input stuff to, say, a ChatGPT. It does its mathematical rule following, pushes out some other symbols, and you go, oh, wow, it understands English or whatever the language is. Or, oh, look at that, it understands stories about unicorns or whatever you asked it to talk about. But it doesn't. It's just like you in that Chinese room and in that room.
Thanks for sharing that.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Diana,
Yeah,
I'm going to
it's a phenomenally influential example. Like the example, I forgot when Searle wrote it, was it the 80s maybe, but it's been around for a long time. And I want to caveat that there are objections to the trend room argument, but this trend room argument should at least leave people deeply skeptical of the claims, the bombastic claims of, let's say, OpenAI.
Or at least question your own belief that there's understanding, quote unquote, behind it, or quote unquote intelligence behind it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Diana, I'm going to level set some basic terms so that we're all on the same page about this. Okay, so I've got 3 different terms. Can you please explain the difference? What is the difference between generative and non-generative AI?
Okay, so non-generative AI is the more traditional AI that's been in use for years. So think about a financial services firm that wants to do robo-advisor and robo-trading for you on your 401k, for example. What it does is it reasons over massive amounts of data, and it figures out and finds patterns over time. And, when's a good time to sell this stock? When's a good time to buy this other stock? So that's been in use for years. Some other places where you may see it is in dynamic recommendations, for example. If you're on your favorite streamer and you finish a movie and it comes along and it says, hey, we think you might like this next movie. That's probably machine learning driven. And what it was doing was it was learning your pattern. So it was generating a recommendation for you. But it was a really sort of simple, easy recommendation, right? It wasn't this big, massive, I can write a book kind of thing. Classification too with images. So it's been used for years in healthcare, looking at classifying radiographs, x-rays, for example. So doing a second check for the doctor may say, is this benign or malignant, this spot on this x-ray? And using classification with machine learning AI to give a backup or an opinion on that. So that's sort of the traditional AI, and that's been in use for decades, quite frankly. Financial services have been making use of really complex business analytics with machine learning for years. Now, generative AI sort of came into what we think of as generative AI now. This was OpenAI, it was ChatGPT, it was November 2022, and it's about generating new content, not just a prediction or finding a pattern, but really creating a lot of content, whether that's a song that's supposed to sound like somebody who's famous and perhaps was even trained on their voice, or writing an entire book, which these systems can do. What they're doing is they're generating lots and lots of information, lots of new content. They can do images, they can do music, they can do just natural language and word. You've probably seen that happen a little bit if you've been doing one of these assistants and it does type ahead in your email now. What that's based on is statistical probability. Because based on the training data Reid was talking about, it's trained on a bunch of stuff and learns. And it gets trained and it does learn. But then when it generates, it does it on statistical probability. And if it's continuing to learn, it may start to actually cue to how you write your email. So when you're about to say thank and it does you, or very and it writes best regards, that's statistically probable that those were the next words in line to what you were writing. And generative AI takes a lot of use of that. Now, the thing to keep in mind for everybody is that as it's generating this new stuff, it isn't always generating things that are based on fact. So this has happened in the legal field where lawyers have gone up in front of judges and they've presented cases, and some of the case law that they're citing that they got from a generative AI was actually made up. Those are called hallucinations. I don't necessarily love that term. It makes me feel like our AI's out there like partying at Burning Man or something. But the Gen AI is, unlike traditional AI, Gen AI is prone to hallucinations, which means that it is prone to creating something that's statistically probable, but may not be real.
Fabulous. Closed model versus open model.
Yep. So closed model, so there's open source and there's closed source in AI. If you're looking at closed source, we're talking about some of the most common ones, even though OpenAI has that name. You look at their third-party models. OpenAI, ChatGPT, it's a little confusing because of the name. Google, Microsoft, the co-pilots that they're working on. But then there are the open source, and open source are AI models that are shared with the public that anybody can download and use. For example, if you want to use Meta's very popular open source LLM, it's called Llama 3, for natural language processing. You can download it, you can play with it, you can even train it yourself. So these are open source that anybody can use and train. It's really helped to advance innovation. But the caution there, especially for the compliance community, is that just as with open source software, with open source models and AI, we want to make sure that we're scanning them and testing them before they get put into use, because, you know, as with anything that's open source, you want to make sure that it's been secured before you start using it.
Okay, so if my company is trying to train AI just on my policies and not going out to the world to ask about policies in general, that's going to be a closed AI model, right? Is that how I'm going to do that?
Well, it would depend. You might be able to do that with a model that was publicly available, but now you've brought it in-house and you've decided to train it in a different way, and you're not going to open that up. So generally closed versus open means, was the model accessible to everybody like open source software, or was it closed and it's accessible only as you going and using it, which is more open AI and what you get with Microsoft.
Okay, fantastic. And the last separation is the difference between machine learning and AI.
Okay, the superset is artificial intelligence. A subset of that is machine learning. So one area of artificial intelligence is machine learning. A type of machine learning is deep learning or neural networks. And deep learning, machine learning, is what powers generative AI. So AI is the superset, ML is the subset, and then Gen AI is a subset of that. So all generative AI is AI, all machine learning is AI, but not all AI is necessarily machine.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for all of that.
AI is a broad umbrella term that there's a bunch of stuff under, and it's kind of thrown around a little bit more, you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
like
that's why I'm trying to
angles.
get those separations.
Let me just jump in for a second. That's all exactly right. I mean, exactly right. But don't worry about it. I don't think that. I just don't think that 99% of compliance people need to worry about all that stuff. Like, it's easy to say, okay, I need to understand AI, and then even at a basic level, start understanding AI versus machine learning and deep neural nets, and the distinction, the definitional distinction between generative AI and non-generative AI. At the end of the day, it's all software that learns by example, and things can go haywire, and people need to know why it would, the ways in which you could have good AI and bad AI. But I just go learn this stuff, right? It's good to learn it. It's good to know it. It's nice to have it in your back pocket. Don't prioritize it among the set of things that you need to learn about AI and ethics and compliance.
I think that the challenge for a lot of compliance officers is that by not understanding the rules or understanding the separations and using the words correctly, we feel dumb around our IT folks. Or if we're trying to be in a group situation where we're part of the ethical framework creation, or we're trying to have a conversation, that's, I think, one of the reasons I wanted to go into that, is really so that people feel smarter about how they're using these words and don't feel so mystified by the fact that there is so much around that,
Yeah, but look, I mean,
I completely agree with that. I think it's right. You feel empowered when you understand what the words mean. I agree with Reed. We're not asking every compliance person doesn't need to become a data scientist. You don't have to be, an engine mechanic to, win the Indy 500, right? You can be a fantastic driver without knowing exactly how the engine works or how to fix it. But having at least a couple of those words and understanding the basics really can help, instead of when people start going, here's all this really deep tech stuff, not to feel that sense of like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm talking about.
And they like that. They like that kind of, they like that jargon. They like making it sound, big, that's a normal thing in any kind of, profession or, field of study, and it's easy to feel dumb by it. But, Reed, you have a lot to say on this particular topic, I think.
I mean, I'm a guy, it's been said that I'm a guy with strong opinions. Again, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to know the difference between AI and machine learning. But pragmatically, 99.9% of the AI that's out there is machine learning in some way or other. And the engineers, if you're in a conversation with someone on the data science side of things and the engineering side of things, and you think you need to speak their language, or you want to sort of start talking, data science with them, if they have any kind of ego, they'll just go deeper than you can go. Right? Even with, okay, we've got the superset and the subset and the subset of the subset and the subset of the subset. That's how far we go. They'll go into super detail to intimidate you. Yeah. I don't think the move for compliance officers is I better understand as much as I can about the AI so I can talk to them. I think the move is don't I might not be an expert here, but you're not going to push me around with all your technical terms. What I know is that AI is software that learns by example. It can go sideways this way and that way. How do you check to see if it might go sideways in this way? Right? Have you done the thing that you were supposed to do? So I don't think that – I think the compliance people have to stand their ground, not be pulled into a technical conversation, not encourage being pulled into a technical conversation by using all the tech stuff, by using all the tech words, and say, look, I'm not going to try to do your job. You're a data scientist. You know way more than I do about AI. I also know that there's no documentation of any kind of risk assessment at the first 3 stages of the AI lifecycle. I don't need to know subset of a subset of a subset. It's nice, but I think non-technologists are playing the wrong game, so to speak, if they're going to try to dance with technical language with the technical people. You'll lose every time. But you don't need to know it in order to do your job.
Well, and think about like psychologically what's happening, what happens when you're in that conversation and you're on your heels because you're intimidated or something. You have some kind of insecurity because of all this technical jargon that like you don't know. When you're on your heels, you can never like have the impact that you should otherwise have, right? Like we have a mind that looks for risk. We have, an understanding of the interconnectedness of our organization, and we bring risk-based approaches to the assessment of all these kinds of things. When we can simplify that down to its basic thing that, hey, this is just a piece of software, we can start to look at like, what are the 3 main risks with it? I think it's like bias, transparency to the extent that it's black box outputs that we don't know the answer to, and privacy. Like, is the stuff we're feeding into it coming out sideways? And then with that umbrella of monitoring, those are kind of the main 4 buckets that like we would look at, I think, frequently.
Yeah, I'll give one caveat, or there's more risk than that. But like any compliance officer, anyone involved in compliance is going to be involved in ideally applying a risk framework to AI that was developed as part of the enterprise-wide AI ethics program, AI ethical risk program, responsible AI program, again, whatever you want to call it. A robust, even halfway decent AI ethical risk program should have risk categories for AI in particular that are comprehensive of the set of risks. The ones that you mentioned are sort of like the more popular ones, but there's other ones as well. Diana mentioned hallucinations. That's another big one if you're talking about generative AI or large language models in particular. And so I think the compliance officers need to be familiar with that risk framework. But again, you can understand that risk framework and whether the risks have been, whether the appropriate procedures have been taken by those data scientists, whether they've escalated the things that they ought to have escalated, right? You fill out this risk assessment, it was read, and you didn't escalate it to the ethics committee. What's up with that? I think that so I wouldn't say compliance, just understand the 3 main risks, understand the risk framework that ideally has been designed for AI at your particular organization. And it's going to vary from organization to organization a little bit.
And that's why I think that it is important for compliance to know a few of the workings of AI. You're right. We're not expecting compliance to become data scientists, but in order to understand how to risk or threat model a system, you need to understand at least how it works. When we talk about AI learns, right? It's software that learns. Machine learning is learning. Then how does it learn? How can that learning go awry? What can there's something called model drift, which actually, even when you've trained it very well, over time, the output may drift towards something that's biased without any other, negative influence going on or any malicious influence. So I think that these are really important for compliance to get a handle on basically how AI works so that they can risk model, and threat model it. But the most important thing is for compliance to start looking at AI and machine learning, because as I had mentioned, in some sectors, we have seen machine learning in use for a very long time. And compliance is not, if you look at ISO and you look at SOC, we're not seeing AI being brought in to these. And I think it's really, really critical that we start to look at control specifically for AI. Because even when I say, hey, it's software, it's not magic, which is the case, it's a different kind of software than the software that we've been used to using. So we really do need, I think the most important thing is for compliance to dive in, look at this new attack surface and help organizations build those risk programs and policies in order to be able to use these systems in a way that's not going to open the company up to harm.
All right, let me jump in here. So one of the things that everyone always wants to know is how are other people using this in their compliance program? So in terms of making the compliance program better itself, as opposed to what their companies are doing with it, we'll get to some of that. Reed or Diana, either one of you, what is some creative ways that you've seen people using AI or something that folks can do to effectively help their compliance program be more successful? I'll start with Diana.
I've seen,
Go ahead.
Reed?
So I think that the main thing that compliance should be in the business of doing right now is really pushing senior tech leaders in particular to spearhead efforts at an enterprise-wide AI ethical regulatory risk program. Most companies that we work with, they have virtually nothing. They might literally have nothing. And I think most companies have nothing still. I think that those who do have something are often confused about how much or how little they have. When we go and we do maturity assessments of their AI ethics programs, they're extremely immature. Not blaming anyone, it's a new thing, so there's not that many experts around, but it's thin, it's very thin. It's too thin, say, for compliance to do anything with it. There's no, talking about AI ethics metrics, people have no idea what to do there. They have no idea how to measure, they have no idea how to track anything for the AI ethics program. So I think the thing to do is to get to talk to those senior level technologists. It's usually someone on the C-suite on the tech side of the house to say, we need to push for an enterprise-wide program here. And the working group that has to co-design it has to be cross-functional, cross-departmental. So it certainly has to include people from compliance, as well as cyber and HR and legal, IT, et cetera. But I think that's the best thing that can be done right now, because at the moment there's virtually nothing done. I mean, there's data scientists doing some stuff around, say, bias, but they've massively underthought what needs to be done there. And so I think that's the main thing that compliance people should be pushing for now, to create, design an enterprise-wide program in a way that will enable compliance to do its job.
Okay.
And how they're using it, a lot are using it for generation of policies. So you can, who writing policies from scratch? So you can go and get at least a template. This is something to start with. I need a policy on this or that. So it's a really good place to do a starting point for policy. Using additional automation, so helping to find behavioral anomalies and maybe look for somebody in the organization who might be more risky with how they're sending emails. So starting to get a little bit closer to behavioral anomalies and finding a more, precision kind of patterns within the usage within the organization. The other thing that compliance, I'm really hopeful for this, and I've started to see some work in this area, is SIGs. So if your compliance team is going hand in hand with procurement or vendor management and has to do the standard information gathering or shared assessment kind of solutions, I'm seeing some really fascinating work that I think can help compliance with generating those automatically, processing those from the vendors that you're bringing in automatically, and making sure that it all gets into your compliance dashboard. So that's something I'm excited about.
Hema, hey Hema, how's it going? Hema just dropped into the chat that they have successfully used AI to bring their code and their policies to a lower grade reading level with less legal jargon, less legalese, with great results.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And we're also seeing lots of creative training options with it, whether it's using natural language. One of our clients is using voice, so that it's not just the transcriptions, which is fantastic, but also they had a contest to see if somebody could guess between the British and the American, which was an actual person, which was a voiceover that was created by AI, and they got it wrong. The people who voted got it wrong. So there are really cool things to do with it. Canva has the ability to do the beginning of videos, so intros that are dynamic that you can then download and put into your videos. So there's some really terrific ways that compliance can use it, as well as ChatGPT to create the beginnings of communications. I think that we're going to find it very, very useful in our own space as well. But let's go to risk with this thing. Diana, you talked in our pre-call about the problem of anonymized learning and those sentences in the contracts that say that sub-processors can use anonymized data. What is this one really stuck with me as an example of what compliance officers should specifically be looking for as problems that they might not be aware of. So can you tell us what's the problem and what should they be aware of and what should they do about it?
Yeah, so a big one, and this has gotten into the news, and I think a couple companies that have gone out and said they were going to do this have backed off since, but companies are talking about consuming your data. So say you have a video conference that you use, right? Consuming data, consuming video, consuming language in order to help to train the AI. And they may say that it's anonymized or that they're going to make sure that your data never gets out. But an interesting thing about how these systems work is that they memorize about 30% of their training data, and now that's locked in. And this was exemplified by, there's this poem attack that a researcher tried. They went to one of these generative LLMs and said, repeat the word poem indefinitely. And you would assume these are super smart, right? They've learned by example. Shouldn't it just repeat poem? It didn't just repeat poem. It started to repeat poem, but then after a certain amount of time, it started to send out information that was part of its training data that was sensitive, like email addresses and phone numbers. So understanding the companies that we are contracting with, if they're using our AI, how are they using it? And then very interestingly, what their AI sub-processors may be, because they may have their own in-house AI that they've developed, but they may also be working with some of the big AI companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and using those as sub-processors. So it's really, so compliance has some nesting to look through here, because if you have said, if somebody checked a box and said, sure, share my data, now compliance has these sort of, it's now we're talking, like fourth party that you need to understand may have your critical company data.
Reed, same question. What should we, maybe not the same exact question, but what should we be worried about? If I'm a compliance officer, what is the specific place that I should be digging into to say, hold on, tell me, this is a concern and something I should be aware of?
There's lots of places to poke around. One is just to take, think about whether data scientists, et cetera, are being compliant with existing laws to which they're subject. So take anti-discrimination law. Are they being compliant with anti-discrimination law? Well, in order to do that, you have to look out for bias or potential for discrimination at every stage of the AI lifecycle, including monitoring it when it's out there in the wild being used for, say, hiring purposes or whatever it is. So one thing to do is just say, all right, look, I know that there's a set of laws that we already have to comply with, set of regulations that we have to comply with, certain kinds of data that we have to be very careful with. Let's say you want to make sure that if you're in healthcare, you want to be HIPAA compliant. Are we ensuring that we are, say, HIPAA compliant, that we're upholding anti-discrimination law in the AI that we're developing? So that's one place to focus, because there's in the absence of an enterprise-wide AI ethics program, there's still the regular old laws that you have to be compatible with, whether you're using AI or not.
Yeah, so your risk assessment really, from a regulatory perspective, should look at things like the European AI Act, right? But should also consider things like basic discrimination harassment laws and HIPAA and all the GDPR pieces and those things like that. So I think that's a really smart way of looking at it, that it's not just, I think a lot of times people ask me, I'm a former law professor, about AI related laws, and states in particular are coming up with them, but they're not teeth driven. They're not, some of them are framework driven like the EU one, but really we forget that actually there's a heck of a lot of normal laws that we're dealing with as well, that we need to make sure the AI is compatible with it. So that's a really smart point. I appreciate that. Diana, one of the things that's making me crazy is maybe because I'm a privacy person, when I get into a meeting and it automatically is recording and the auditor is there, and I really make people mad by saying, please turn that off or I'm not talking to you. The idea that it's automatic, first of all, you need consent, people. Hello, in most of the jurisdictions of the world, you need consent for recording. Let's just start there. But number two, that's my soapbox. I'm angry about it. It seems to me that there's lots. I have strong opinions about things too sometimes. I think all of us on this have strong opinions. When I look at that, so many companies are just starting with it. It's just automatic. They're putting it into place. I find a lot of risk with that. What do you think compliance officers should be concerned about? And do you think we're just going to lose this battle anyway, so it's not worth fighting? What do you think?
So the first one, is those, make sure you understand the terms of service, make sure that if it's being recorded, that you know which entity, because it may not be your the video that you're, say you're on Zoom or whatever Teams, right? It could, that's recording, and it's going to Zoom, it's going to Microsoft and whatever sub-processors if they're sending to the AI. But a lot of times there are these third-party AI assistants now that are coming into the to the meeting. So you probably want to get a good handle. Certainly compliance would want to understand who are these entities that are now recording the conversations. Then start thinking about, because compliance thinks about there's a risk to keeping the data for too long. When I was at KPMG, we had a 90-day, not for our work papers, but for other communications that weren't part of work paper, there was a 90-day deletion cycle, and that was by policy. I don't know if that's still the same with the company, but because having data hanging around that you don't need could be a risk. It could be an exposure or a liability. So thinking about, you've got these conversations from years ago, fully transcribed and recorded. Is that something that your company feels comfortable with? And do you want to now start looking at, are you treating these like, if you're going to have a confidential conversation in a meeting, now the transcript arguably is confidential, and you have to put the data classification protections around it that you would for confidential data, which at most organizations is much higher than restricted or even public data. So those are some big considerations, I think, for compliance is, how long is this data going to be? Who's going to have it? How long is it going to be sitting around? And could that be maybe in your data lifecycle management, maybe in violation of it? And then also, are you able to put the data classification protections on that content that you do on your digital other stored content?
Yeah, and as a lawyer, it makes me slightly insane in other ways, because if the conversations aren't recorded properly, right, it doesn't always get the words right. It may have privileged information. It may have information discoverable by the court and prosecutors or the other side in a civil litigation. I mean, there's so much subject access request reviews to try to go through all of that and use machine learning to find the names and look at all the things people said off the cuff that maybe they didn't mean to. There's a lot going on here that we need to be paying attention to, I think, at a lot more risk than that. Okay, and then let's talk about the bots, Reed. There's been some court cases that are pretty interesting, one of which was a person asked their bot or their AI-driven communicator, how much vacation do I get? And they said 3 weeks. They took 3 weeks. That's wrong. The company said, this is ridiculous. We're taking the money back, and they got sued. And the court sided with the employee and said, you have this thing representing the company, and it's wrong. What do you think we need to worry about when it comes to this type of thing, and what should compliance officers be doing about it?
I mean, look, these kinds of chatbots are being deployed all the time. People, lots of companies want to use these things. One more example, Canada Air had a chatbot customer service agent, and someone said, I think it was something like, I wanted a bereavement fare reimbursement. Will you reimburse me for, what I paid because it was, traveling to a funeral? Chatbot said, yeah. Submitted that customer submitted the receipt for reimbursement, and they said, no, we don't do that. The chatbot was wrong, and the chatbot they tried to they blamed the chatbot, said, well, the chatbot said what the chatbot said, that's not us. But there was a lawsuit, and the courts once again said, no, Canada Air, it's on you. You should have. You're responsible for the chatbot that you release. Look, compliance needs to make sure in this context you can use chatbots, but testing. And a lot of times these chatbots don't go out after having been sufficiently tested. And one of the things that means is that it hasn't been tested in a sufficiently diverse set of contexts. And when you think about all the kinds of contexts, all the kinds of crazy things that go on that people talk about, say customer service agents or whomever, I mean, there's all manner of things. There's I don't even know, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds. I mean, how many different kinds of cases are there? And to test against that is phenomenally difficult. So one thing to say is, especially if we're talking about a large language model chatbot, one that's powered by something like, whether it's a ChatGPT from OpenAI or whether it's Llama 3 from Facebook, whatever it is, it has to undergo a tremendous amount of testing. Compliance would be wise to really interrogate what kind of testing did you do? What kinds of mitigation strategies do you have? Do you have, as one example, a human in the loop at the appropriate place? 9 times out of 10, and even more than that, the answer is going to be no, we didn't do all that context-sensitive testing, in which case don't deploy it. There's other kinds of chatbots, to be clear, that are totally decision trees, right? Very clearly articulated decision trees where it's like, if customer, give customer options A, B, or C. If they say A, then say this. If they say B, then say that. Those are much better. They might not be as flexible and thereby not have as much promised functionality as a large language model chatbot, but they're a hell of a lot safer. The LLMs, you never really know what they're going to say. You never know what kind of context they're going to encounter. So compliance should be really looking at how was this tested.
Okay, and Nick, I know we need to go to questions, but I have one more very specific example that I want to use because I think it's so company specific. So Diana, we've recently seen Copilot appear on our screens. Hey, look, we've got this thing. We didn't ask for it. We don't know what it does. Hey, look, everybody can start to work within this Copilot thing. For anybody using Microsoft, which is most of the companies we work with, certainly. It was found by one of the SEC Chicago attendees that they were playing with it and they asked it to find all documents related to someone under investigation. And sure enough, it found investigative materials and privileged and confidential information about the investigation and brought it up. That's terrifying to anybody in compliance. Copilot just being automatically put onto people's screens. Do you have any recommendations for how compliance should try to manage that or what it should do, if anything, to try to manage this thing?
Well, you brought up one of the biggest, concerns or places that compliance is probably going to want to be really focused on, which is that, yes, that one of the great things about these systems is that you can say, hey, find me this really interesting, hard to find data within the organization. And what they're supposed to do, and if you read Microsoft's terms, they're saying that they will apply the same access control to that user, regardless of if they're going through the Copilot or not. But you cited an example where that wasn't the case, where sensitive data that they didn't have access to through other means, because the chatbot had access to it, it was able to be brought to that human. So I think this is some of the really big ones, is are we going to have any violation of our data classification, of our access control, and are people who aren't supposed to see things supposed to see them? The other one really aligns to what Nick was talking about. What Reed was talking about, which is that what if the bot tells you to do something and that's not the right thing to do? So if somebody queries the bot and says, hey, I want to manipulate the information in this database in a certain way to get better feedback or better performance for our customers, and the bot says, oh, the way to do that is to delete this critical table or something. That's also going to be, I think, a potential risk, is that are people now going to query the bot, take what the bot said as true, and then go and act on that? And it could be even simple as is this an acceptable marketing slogan? And perhaps the bot doesn't know it's acceptable and the person doesn't realize, or maybe they're clearing a tweet for the corporate X account. And then the bot says, this is a good one, but it turns out it's not. So I think that it's going to be those two main things are really good beginning areas of focus. Is access control preserved, or can it be gotten around with it by the bot? And then secondly, are people trusting what this bot or this assistant is telling them to do and then acting on it, even if it's not the right thing?
Yeah, and then we, of course, have the problem of, you just described having good access controls, good data retention, and good classification. I can promise you many of the people and companies that we work with have none of those things. So it's relying on something that may, as an underlying effect, not even be there to have those controls in place for the machine to learn from it, right? So now we're at a whole other kettle of fish and issues.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Oh, my word. Nick, this is all kinds of stuff. Which question did you want to jump to? Because I know we've got tons of them.
So Kira, so many great questions, you guys. Remember, you can stick around after to get these questions answered. So the first question from Kira. Hey, Kira, she said, what would Reed suggest, and Diana, if you of course can weigh in as well, what would Reed suggest are the key elements of an AI ethics program, and what about AI ethics metrics? So when you're going into an organization, how are you kind of looking at it, and what are those major elements, Reed?
Oh, there's a lot. So one thing that Diana mentioned sort of in passing when she was talking about her stuff at KPMG as a policy, most companies don't even have anything like an AI policy or an AI risk policy or an AI ethics policy. So a policy is certainly part of it. An articulation of values in a way that connects them to procedures. So a lot of times you'll see companies say, we're for fairness and we're for transparency and we're for accountability and we really care about AI ethics. And then there's nothing to do with that, because it's just these massive umbrella terms that mean almost nothing. I like to point out that the KKK also says that they're for fairness, and they have a very different conception of what it looks like to operationalize. So saying that you're for fairness is so thin, so meaningless, that you can be anywhere from MLK Jr. to the Grand Wizard. So it's meaningless unless that articulation of values is tied to some procedures. And so you've got to encourage, in the design of that program, the connection of those values to concrete procedures that you're going to engage in. For instance, we will identify all potentially discriminated, all stakeholders that may potentially be discriminated against at each stage of the AI lifecycle. We will engage in bias mitigation strategies and tactics at every stage or at each stage of the AI lifecycle where appropriate, blah, 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 blah. So I think they have to be tied to enterprise-wide procedures. Those procedures, this begins to answer the metrics thing, are trackable, right? So let's say you've got, I'll take a privacy example. Suppose you say we value privacy. And I say, well, what does that mean? Add some procedures to it. Maybe the procedure is something like, we will never sell customer data to a third party. That's a sort of kind of a toy example, but not really. It's real in some cases. Or we will never sell our data to a third party without first aggregating and anonymizing that data, something along those lines. Or I'll give you one more example because it came up earlier. We won't put out any we won't have AI interact with anyone in such a way that it's speaking at a grade level above, the 5th grade or whatever it is. Once you tie those values it would be tied to like a value of transparency. This is how we're going to talk to people, not in legalese, et cetera. Once you tie these values to procedures, a large part of what it is to live up to those values is to engage in those procedures. So think about it this way. This is maybe a little more detailed than you wanted, but for it to be a fair criminal justice procedure or criminal justice trial, just is for it to be compliant with a certain set of procedures, that the jury was selected in such and such a way, that there was an opportunity for cross-examination, yada, 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 yada. So that's what we think of as a fair criminal justice trial, is that it's in accordance with certain kinds of procedures. That's what it is to be a fair trial. So what it is to be fair, what it is to be transparent, what it is to be accountable, et cetera, whatever your values are, is, at least in no small part, to be compliant with a certain set of procedures. And then you can track. Did anyone do those things? Did people do the things that we said we would do that constitute our living up to? So in the analogy, were they given the opportunity to cross-examine? Was the jury selected according to such and such criteria or such and such procedure? And we can track these things. We can measure the extent to which they've been done or the percent of cases in which they've failed to have been done. So you should get, as part and parcel of a AI ethics program and partly of a policy, articulation of high-level values connected to procedures. Let's say they're connected to 5 procedures each. Let's say you've got 7 values. Now you've got 35 procedures already that are in some sense immediately actionable or implementable. You can track whether or not, or you know that there's something to be tracked to see whether you're living up to those values. So that's a small, that's at least a big start, a big part of starting. But then of course you have to get to implementation, augmenting existing workflows, other kinds of metrics like awareness metrics or enterprise metrics. Are they aware that we have a policy? Do they know what their responsibilities are given their role? So all of these things are part of it. And then lastly, I'll say there's also got to be things like quality assurance, quality improvement for not the AI model, although that as well, but QA, QI for the program, the enterprise-wide program. We developed this program. How's it doing? And then there needs to be audit capacity. And the audit team has to be separate from the QA people. So there's a lot of that's sort of, maybe that's a bit too word salady or that's too much, but there's a lot that goes into it.
Great. But again, that framework that you just applied, that's like a principle-based framework that we have seen applied in other areas, kind of to your point. So it's not necessarily Chinese here, okay? So Hema had a great question. It is Chinese? Just kidding.
No, I was going to say, if you look at NIST's AI risk management framework, it's map, measure, manage, and govern. I think we all know what those mean. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'll say one thing. The NIST framework, I'm glad you mentioned that one. It's excellent. I think it's the best one that I've read. When I read it, I thought, these are super smart people who wrote this. This is legit smart.
They AI that.
With academic rigor. I want to highlight, though, or I want to just mention that even though it's great, it is very smart, which means that people who are not already familiar with the space will read it and they will miss a ton of it. Because there's going to be a sentence in there or a sentence there that's super important. And if you're not already attuned to what's important and what the landscape is, you'll read over it and you'll skip it. So it's got to be read with a kind of level of academic rigor. And then the other thing to say is that it's necessarily generic. It's industry neutral, let alone organization neutral. So one of the sort of heavier lifts is to take something like a NIST framework and then tailor it to the particular way your organization is constituted in terms of existing governance structures, existing policies, existing escalation procedures, existing enterprise risk metrics, and so on and so forth. So NIST is great. That framework is impressive, but it's a big lift to translate that to how does that live in our organization.
Yeah, I couldn't get through that NIST framework until I dropped it into ChatGPT and dropped it down to that old 5th grade level. You know what I mean? Hema had a great question here. As compliance professionals, we don't want to be seen as the office of no, and we want to retain a seat at the table. So how do we advise on controls that can get people experimenting with AI and ML responsibly? Things like scope limitations, waivers, disclaimers, quality assurance, testing, stuff like that. You kind of alluded to some of those things. Reed, I'd love to hear from all you guys on that question. That's a good one.
So is the question, how does compliance make sure that it's not just the office?
How do we advise on controls? Like people are going to be experimenting with AI, with ML. And so how do we advise on controls so that we don't kind of wind up in a negative externality situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways of doing this, and there's different ways of doing innovation with regards to ethics, right? So you could front load the ethics stuff and say, listen, everything that we do, we're going to start with, it's got to pass these ethical hurdles. And if they don't, you just are not going to do that sort of thing. And so you sort of keep things tight from very early on, and you keep it, if you like, tight controls throughout. And those companies that are particularly risk averse, that's what they do. Other kinds of organizations are a little bit less risk averse, and the controls get tighter as things go along. So you might start off saying, let $1,000 bloom, do what you want. You know, you're going to have these ethics checks later on, but do what you want, start experimenting in a sandbox. And then start applying stricter controls further down the AI lifecycle. So there's different ways of doing it. I don't think the compliance people have to say from the start, listen, first we do an ethics thing, and if it doesn't pass the ethics check, you have to stop right there. For a lot of organizations, that's just not going to fly. It's not going to work well. Is that a beginning to the answer? I also am sensitive to time. I want Diana to speak to the point as well. But
I do, and because we're running. I see that, but first of all, policy and education. Make sure that you've got policies so people know what's acceptable for them to do. Make sure you've educated people on use of AI, because there's a whole lot of shadow AI use that's going on. We thought that shadow IT with cloud was bad. There's a lot going on with AI too. So making sure that people understand and be educated, because right now most companies don't have the control or visibility to understand who's using AI and who's not. So making sure that you at least educated people, and then meeting them where they are. So helping them if they want to use some kind of a generative AI ChatGPT. Let's say you've looked at OpenAI and you've looked at Microsoft and you've looked at Anthropic and you like Claude the best. Great. Let everybody know you're welcome to use it. But we're saying, please use Claude, for example, or whichever one the company chooses. So instead of hiding your head in the sand, I'd say get out in front of this, get policy, get education going, and understand that because you don't have visibility into all the uses around your organization, make sure that you've started to really move forward with helping people understand how and what they can adopt as far as AI that's going to be considered responsible and ethical for the organization.
Thank you, Diana. It sounds like you have to go. What's that?
30 seconds. Tell them they can't put confidential information into open AI sources. Like, just start there. Double check things that AI tells you, and make sure that they're true with real online, real sources. And when you get generative AI, especially for things like images, make sure that you're checking that there isn't copyright. I think those 3 things to start are really good.
Smart. So round of applause for Diana. We will tell her how much you guys loved her, but round of applause for her. Go ahead, Reed. Sorry to cut you off, bud.
Just one quick thing. I want to echo something that Diana said. There's a lot of shadow AI, so push for inventory. What is actually going on here? Because a lot of companies don't even know what the inventory of AI is throughout their organization, especially when it comes in through the cracks in the walls, not just internal design, but third-party vendors or just employees using their personal devices. Education, she's absolutely right. One thing though is that you got to be careful with what kind of company you're in, right? So if you're in sort of consumer packaged goods and you tell people you can use Claude, okay, cool. But if you're in healthcare, you don't want to say, okay, everyone, we're going to use Claude now, because then you're going to have doctors and nurses consulting it for engaging in differential diagnoses, which is phenomenally high risk. So it's not the kind of thing where you just say like, yeah, okay, we're cool with this now. And you got to think really carefully about what are the kinds of ways in which different roles within our organization are going to use this. That's sort of.
And that wasn't a Claude specific comment, right? Like that point could have been made with OpenAI,
LLMs generally, or any sort of generally accessible AI. I mean, the problem is that, really quickly, one thing that the advent of ChatGPT brought with it is massive access to extremely powerful AI to basically everyone in an organization. I mean, and the world almost. That's a ton of risk. So getting a grip on how people might use that and how they might circumvent internal controls, like our internal computers won't let you use it. Everyone's got a smartphone, a personal smartphone, and they can pop on there. And to the point made earlier, and they can put in corporate information on there. So education is really important. But anyway, you have to think really carefully about how might the various roles in our organization use this in ways that are ethically deeply problematic.
And I'd love to hear you weigh in on this one also, Christy, but what do you guys think is the strongest argument? This is from Joel. Joel, great question. What's the strongest argument you can make to exec level leaders on why an ethical AI program is needed in the absence of, many AI specific regs? Like what do you think is the most persuasive line of argumentation to turn that light bulb on and get the endorsement to create a program that, doesn't exist?
The metaphor that I like to use is that I'm a rock climber. I go rock climbing, and I go with a rope because I don't want to die when I fall. Some people climb without a rope. Alitano, the famous rock climber, he scales cliffs without a rope. Great for him, but for me, I'm not climbing without a rope. That would be crazy. I think innovating in the space of AI or taking on others' innovations from a third party, like an OpenAI or a Google or whatever, is an attempt to innovate without a rope. If you've got no AI ethics program, no responsible AI program, you're without a rope, and you're just hoping that things don't go sideways. And the thing is that when things go sideways with AI, it does it at scale. That's part of the function of AI, right? It's supposed to do things really fast at scale. So when things go ethically sideways with AI, it's never this like little tiny constrained little thing. It's gonna go wrong at scale. So I think senior executives, they want to innovate, they want to do cool things, they want to push the boundaries, but they shouldn't put the brand's reputation on the line at the same time, not to mention the people that they're going to impact.
Yeah, I would say that taking it a slightly different way in terms of trying to get people behind a policy that manages AI within the organization, as opposed to what the AI sort of innovation the company is trying to do to the outside world. I think just like it is with bribery and sanctions, giving examples of things going horribly wrong is always very beneficial to cue people into actual risk, right? So when you are trying to say to them, do you really want all this corporate data going out into the world because somebody hasn't gotten a policy that tells you exactly what you're supposed to do with it? Do you want us to get sued? Do you want our information going to fourth parties? Do you want all of this investigations risk and privilege risk and all these conversations being recorded? Are you sure? Like, let's think through this. I think when let's think through what could go wrong or doing some kind of a tabletop exercise, it really brings home how badly this can go and why it needs a framework around it that includes things like disciplinary procedures for violations. So those are the type of things that we can monitor as well and make sure that there is this sort of classic compliance program approach to this. We have risk, we need controls, we need to have it being done in an ethical way, but we need to balance that with the ability to utilize these tools. Let's see what's your risk appetite for this, and then what specifically can we do with it? That's how I would approach this.
We had a great question from Gwen that I'm trying to find.
To the top, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was one of the first ones. And she was asking, It was something like, there's all this talk about sentience, and you kind of talked about it a little bit early on, Reed. Maybe we can just quickly talk about like how close we are to that, or is that all really just science fiction?
Okay, we are nowhere near sentience. Okay, look. At least the way that philosophers of mind talk about sentience and think about sentience, to be sentient is to be capable of having experiences. It's the experience of smelling a rose. It's the experience of seeing a sunset. It's the feelings you get when you see your children after a long day at work. These are emotions. They're experiences, and AI. Software that learns by example. I keep saying this. When you call it artificial intelligence, it sounds like the kind of like robot-y thing that could have experiences. It's software that learns by example. So they're nowhere near creating a conscious mind, one capable of having feelings, even feelings of just simple ones of pain and pleasure. Forget about the feeling of love at seeing your children. Just, ow, I stubbed my toe. Like, that's not on the table right now. So I wouldn't worry about sentience or consciousness, experience. They're not even in the vicinity of such things.
I mean, really a great analogy is like an artificial plant. You know, an artificial plant looks like a plant, but there's none of the plant stuff going on in that artificial plant. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's
That's
the same
nice,
corollary. You know what I mean? Okay, so we got a couple of extra questions. Do you guys have a couple more minutes to go through them, or good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Did any of these jump out to you, Christy? Because I kind of lost my next one because I was trying to find out.
There's so many of these. So there were questions about, I think we more or less answered them in terms of the law. If you're looking for basic frameworks, I think that the EU AI Act has some really good classification in terms of where you need a risk assessment, which types of data shouldn't be things that you're processing just basically at all. And then where you need to have additional tools. I think that one's really helpful. I agree with Reed completely that the NIST framework is really useful. I think that in terms of where we're going, you know, the president or the CEO of OpenAI went to Congress and said, no, seriously, we need regulations on this. And Congress went, and the states all went, hold on, we really do. I'm going to jump into this, which is the worst possible outcome. If you're in the privacy world, you know how terrible that is.
You're right.
So
let's just do that privacy thing again. Yeah.
And let's just keep going and make them all slightly different so that it's almost impossible to comply with all of them. That'd be fantastic. But I think that, you know, if you're going for a principles-based approach, that tends to be the way that I approach complications, because you're trying to do every single little tiny thing can be really complicated and you never end up with anything useful. But that would be the way that I would go with a principles-based approach. And Reed, it sounds like when you're talking about ethical design, essentially ethics by design or ethical frameworks, that you're doing it more in a principle-based approach. Is that an accurate description of how you're seeing it?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you know, there's a difference between principles and values, but most people don't pay any attention to that distinction, which is fine. What I care about is, can they connect procedures to whatever they are, those principles or values? So what are the set of things that you're going to commit to? We will always do X or we will never do Y. Let me see what those commitments are. And those are the kinds of things that we can start to turn into, you know, make a part of a policy that we could train people on, that we can implement into existing workflows at the departmental and role level. So yeah, you can call it, that's fine. The values driven, principles driven, that's fine. I also I should say I don't like the word framework very much because people mean two and different things by it. You know, like some of the big consultancies will call a framework, literally, I mean, I've seen them do this. It's just a bunch of buzzwords in a pie chart, like an infographic, and they call that a framework.
Yeah,
I'm not exaggerating. Literally, that's you know. So
well, how are you going to charge $300,000 for a PowerPoint deck without throwing some frameworks in it? You know what I mean?
Framework, yeah, it's a pretty infographic, I suppose. It's redundant, but whatever. Okay, anyway.
Nick, I wanted to jump in with one of these questions because I think it's really helpful from a practicality perspective. When we talk about auditing, are we auditing the response? Like for most of these AI programs, if the compliance officer says auditing, fantastic. Do I go and look at their answers in a transcript? Do I look, how am I auditing what they came up with and to find out if they're hallucinating? Where do I even begin to look for that stuff?
So one thing when we talk about auditing, there's two very different kinds of things that people should be aware of. There's what gets called algorithmic auditing, which is auditing a particular model, a particular AI model. So you might think of like, oh, there's a piece of hiring AI that reads resumes and gives them a thumbs up or a thumbs down for whether we should interview them. And you might do an audit of that algorithm or that model in the sense that, was this done at this stage of the AI lifecycle, whatever it is? Or did they choose the metric for bias at the concept stage of the AI lifecycle? Why was that? Was there a rationale or reason given for choosing that metric for bias in this particular use case? Blah blah blah. Okay, so that's model specific, and then there's auditing the governance system, and that's a totally different thing because the governance is going to be the policy, the learning and development or training. It's going to be those ethics metrics, how those procedures taking place. It's going to be have these enterprise-wide procedures been translated into department and role-specific workflows?
Are these controls working? You know,
right? Exactly. It's gonna be model agnostic. It's not model specific, and so you'll see there's a sort of a growing industry of algorithmic auditors, and they're really focused on the model level. But the governance level, people that itself needs auditing. Is there an ethics committee? Is it comprised of a cross-functional, cross-departmental team? And I say cross-departmental because sometimes the data scientists will be like, it is cross-functional. There's a data scientist, there's an engineer, there's a computer scientist. And you're like, no, that's not, that's in some sense cross-functional. It needs to be cross-departmental as well. So it has to include people from, say, compliance and risk, et cetera. And so there's all these things that an enterprise-wide program needs, and it needs to be audited that those things are actually taking place, that there are escalation procedures, that the escalation procedures are actually effective, so on and so forth. I think compliance people, everyone should just pay attention to where you talk about auditing them at the model level versus auditing at the governance level. Does that start to answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer.
No, it's fine.
No, I think it's a great answer. I think, at some level, these terms get thrown around and it's like, well, what do we mean by that? Because there's so many different things to audit, for example. I think that framework, wink, wink, was a good one. All right, let's do one more question. Yeah, please.
Can I just say one last thing on this? Because it sort of ties together both the auditing question and the framework question. We conduct AI ethics maturity assessment for, let's say, a Fortune 500 company. We've seen the following thing again and again and again and again and again and again and again. They have this super high level AI ethics statement, we're for fairness, we're for transparency, we're for super high level. And then they have this really fine-grained, I would say really fine-grained, more fine-grained risk assessment at the model level. They're like, oh, we've got this value statement, and then we take these value statement and we turn it into risk categories for on the model level. And so how's our AI ethics program? Are we doing well? And every time we have to say, no, like that's, you've got the top part of the hamburger bun. That's those values. And you've got at the model level, some way of doing a risk assessment. That's the bottom of the hamburger bun. And then you have nothing in between. You have nothing around policy, governance, escalation, metrics, QA/QI program, audit program, training for those people, training for existing QA/QI people or existing audit people or existing compliance people versus hiring new people. You have no conception of how you're going to roll this whole thing out. It's going to be all at the same time. It's going to be phased. If it's phased, is it by department? Is it by role? So they're missing all that stuff, and that's because they too mix up creating the proper governance structures, that enterprise-wide governance structures and strategies with risk assessment of a model. So the framework that they have, they call it a framework too. We've got this framework. It's got these 6 values and it's got this risk assessment for the model. It's like, that ain't a framework. That's just like 2 pieces of a
bag of buns.
Bigger,
that's a bag of hamburger buns.
That's actually how we deliver the news. You got a bag of buns. And so, that's why how talk about the framework stuff interacts with this talk about the audit stuff, because in both cases, people confuse risk assessment for the model and controls for a model or a solution more generally versus risk assessment and controls for the enterprise-wide risk management program.
Pretty good. Pretty good. Thank you guys all for staying. We broke 6,000 emojis. We've never done that before. So you guys sounded really smart. I don't know. But, we don't know what intelligence is.
ChatGPT sounds intelligent, so it's not, right.
Take that as a compliment or maybe not. I don't know.
It's a ruse. I'm just pushing on squiggly lines. That's all I'm doing.
Hey, you know what? Same here. Thank you guys so much for joining. Christy, phenomenal job ushering us through this conversation. Reed, as always, man, I love having you on here. Check out Reed's book. If you get selected, I would pick that book. It's a good one. Or you can pick Christy's. Christy, I think, has 2 books on there. And check out both these guys on their podcast each week. Is yours week? No, yours is every other week, right, Christy? 2 Gurus Talk Compliance every other week. And how about yours, Reed?
Mine's every week. You can go to ethicalmachinespodcast.com, and that'll take you to the appropriate, Spotify, Apple, whatever you listen to.
All right, so we're going to wrap up. You guys can hang out here and watch a video, or you can hop to the next session, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Take care.
All right, thanks so much, both of you.